Remember that you always need to include longitudinal and circumferential overlaps in your calculations. Now that our jacketing is measured correctly, we're ready to cut. You'll need tools to work with from here on if you are working along with us. You'll need a tape measure or a rule, a straight cut sheet metal shears, a circular cut sheet metal shears, utility knife, divider, marker, straight edge, and tie wire or bungee cords. Roll jacketing is normally cut in one of three ways: automatically in a cut-to-length line, by hand with large sheet metal shears, and by hand with smaller handheld sheet metal shears.
Jacketing manufacturers or large fabrication shops use automatic cut-to-length machines which may also roll the jacketing. Smaller shops often use large hand-operated sheet metal shears. In this fashion, the roll is placed on a dispenser rack which you might set up yourself. Pull through the shear onto a cutting table to the desired length and then cut by the shear. The cutting table should be equipped with a built-in ruler or stops for accurate cuts. The sections are then rolled by a sheet metal roller, stacked, and marked by size. Cutting by hand is the third method. To cut by hand, open the carton and place the jacketing on a clean floor area. Remove the plastic restraint that holds the end of the jacketing, being sure to prevent unrolling and make sure the end is cut square. The moisture barrier side will be faced upwards. Then measure the desired length on both edges of the jacketing and use a utility knife with a straight edge to score the moisture barrier and metal. Be careful not to scratch or braid the moisture barrier. Then, you should simply flex the jacketing at the score to get a clean break. An alternate method is to make a cut line with your marker and then cut the section with a straight cut sheet metal shears. Now that the jacketing is cut, it's ready to be applied.
Now hold on there, because we got to think before we apply. At what point on the insulated piping should the jacketing be started? What's the best plan to avoid working over previously jacketed piping? Before we actually put it on, we've got to answer these questions. Let's take where to start the jacketing first.
Horizontal piping will slope downward if the pipe carries steam. If this is the case, the jacketing should be started at the lowest point so the circumferential overlaps prevent water entry. Other horizontal piping may not slope down, which will allow you greater flexibility in deciding where to start the jacketing. Vertical piping always requires the jacketing to be started at the lowest point. This also is to prevent water from entering the jacketing at the circumferential overlap. Jacketing can also be started at a fitting. Assuming the fitting is already insulated and protected with a fitting cover, the jacketing should always be applied so a watershed is created. In some cases, the jacketing will be applied over the fitting cover. In some cases, it will be applied under the fitting cover. How can you avoid working over previously insulated and jacketed piping? This is important because you want to keep the applied jacketing as free from dents and scratches as possible. If the application is to a building interior, you'll want to insulate and jacket the highest horizontal piping first and then work your way down. If the application is to a horizontal pipe rack inside or outside, scaffolding will be required. First apply the jacketing to the insulated piping furthest from the scaffold, and then work towards the scaffold. If the application is to vertical insulated piping, scaffolding may or may not be required. If scaffolding is used, you'll want to first apply the jacketing to the lowest point and work up until you need to move to the next highest scaffold level. Then, you'll want to repeat the process, moving up level by level until the entire vertical pipe is jacketed. Now that we've determined where to start applying the jacketing, We're ready to roll, straight to the job site.
We're going to take a look at some typical applications of metal jacketing, including application to horizontal and vertical piping, jacketing at jacketing penetrations, and metal fitting covers. First, let's take a look at metal jacketing being applied to horizontal piping. Since you're ready to apply the jacketing, you've already figured, measured, and cut to the correct size and number of sections which you need to complete the job. In addition, you've already transported seals and strapping, tie wire, and tools to the work area close to the pipe being jacketed. Where will you start the jacketing?
Does a pipe slope downward? If so, you'll probably want to start at the lowest point. Are there fittings along the piping? If so, you may want to start at a fitting. How many pipes are being insulated and jacketed? Should you start jacketing the insulated pipe furthest away? Do pipe hangers or pipe supports exist along the insulated piping that require adjustment when applying insulation and jacketing? If so, the jacketing for these areas should already have been applied along with the insulation to keep from adjusting hangers twice. What is your best plan to hide the longitudinal overlap seams from whoever will gaze upon your completed masterpiece? When your starting point has been decided, place the first piece of jacketing around the insulation. Be sure the jacketing is drawn snug to the insulation. Temporarily secure the jacketing section with 1 or 2 pieces of tie wire or your bungee cords. Also, you'll need to make sure that the longitudinal overlap seam is parallel to the insulated piping. The overlap seam should always be positioned downward at 4 o'clock or 8 o'clock position to keep water from entering the jacketing. If you are jacketing several insulated pipes, the longitudinal overlap seam should be placed on the side of the piping nearest to the pipe in order to hide the seam. At this point, readjust the jacketing section and tie wire if necessary to keep the overlap seam parallel with the piping. You should next loosely wrap additional jacketing sections around the insulation until you reach a fitting, pipe support, or pipe hanger. Skip these objects, since they should already have been insulated and jacketed. Then continue laying the jacketing over and around the insulation until you reach the end of the piping. Return to your starting point and align the second section longitudinal overlap with the previous section overlap. Remember that you need to provide a 2-inch circumferential overlap over the previous section. Then temporarily secure each section snugly with a tie wire, taking time to readjust overlaps if necessary. You should repeat this process until you have worked your way to the end of the piping, or until the time of day that will allow all permanent fastening devices to be installed by quitting time. Return to your starting point and apply the strapping with seals on centers determined by the job specifications. Add 6 inches to the circumference and cut the required number of straps. Then thread a wing seal onto each strap, making sure they are positioned correctly, and bend back the strap at the seal to keep the seal from slipping. Larger size piping will require the use of strapping tensioners to pull slack out of the strap wrapped around the jacketing. Smaller piping often only requires hand tensioning. After the strap is tensioned, bend the strap back over the seal and bend down the wings of the seal to hold the strap securely. Then, cut the excess strapping and dispose of it properly. When tensioned, the seal should always be placed on a longitudinal overlap and in straight line with the other seals. Normally, strapping is applied first directly over the circumferential overlap and on 9-inch centers. When each section of jacketing is firmly secured with strapping, cut and remove the temporary tie wire. Place the cut tie wire in the jacketing carton with the cut strapping or in another container designated for proper disposal. Application of strapping and seals and removal of tie wire should be completed by quitting time to avoid moisture from becoming entrapped in the insulation.
The application just shown concerns roll jacketing being cut and applied to insulated piping. As mentioned earlier, Jacketing may also be prefabricated by the jacketing manufacturer. If prefabricated jacketing was used for this typical application, the jacketing would have arrived from the manufacturer already pre-cut and rolled to your specific insulated pipe size. Minor differences exist between the application of rolled jacketing and the application of prefabricated jacketing. Prefabricated jacketing is easier to use because it has an automatic 2-inch circumferential overlap and a modified Z-lock on the longitudinal seam. This Z-lock closure eliminates the need to temporarily secure jacketing with tie wire while completely prohibiting water entry via longitudinal seam. The added rigidity of the Z-lock allows strapping to be placed on 18-inch centers instead of 9-inch or 12-inch centers. Let's take a minute to summarize what we need to remember. Your longitudinal overlaps must be straight and parallel to the pipe in an inconspicuous location and at either 4 or 8 o'clock position. 2-inch circumferential and longitudinal overlaps are always necessary. You need to make sure that the jacketing fits snugly against the insulation. Always work carefully and safely, being sure to avoid denting or scratching the jacketing so that you'll be proud of your work. And finally, you'll need to perform each step efficiently before starting another step. Now that you have the fundamentals down for the application of jacketing to horizontal piping, let's see if we can apply some jacketing to a vertical pipeline. Again, the application is typical of what you'll need to encounter when on the job. You'll need the same materials which you use for the horizontal insulated pipe. There will be some previously cut and rolled jacketing sections, previously fabricated strapping and seals, tie wire or bungee cords, and your tools. Also, the vertical applications, you'll need to fabricate Z-clips out of stainless steel. We're assuming that all these materials have already been transported to your work area.